It may be the case that the end is in sight, but at what cost and at what gain? To conclude the show, I'm joined now by MEE's own editor-in-chief, David Hearst. David, welcome back to the studio.
Thank you.
Maybe that is the first obvious question. Does this peace plan look like the end is in sight, or could we be sitting here in a year's time and having the same conversation?
It feels like the end is in sight simply because I think Trump has shown some impatience with Netanyahu, and that's been very widely reported. That has got to be balanced by all the times he's let Netanyahu rip up a ceasefire agreement that his own Steve Witkoff had put together. So in saying that as several people have been reporting that Trump really has boxed Netanyahu in, what they forget to say is how much leeway he gave Netanyahu even since his presidency began. And then, of course, Netanyahu had this track record of tearing up peace agreements arranged by Joe Biden as well. And I think the count stands at about 8 or 9 now, different attempts. So it was 7 before. So we've got to be very skeptical. But my gut is that this is the beginning of the end of the war so far. However, the actual plan that Trump is and his advisors are operating from are so far away from reality and what is achievable on the ground in every respect that we have to be, it's a question of just taking the gains that we've got, which would be a stop in the war and a partial pullback of Israeli troops, particularly from the Netzarim corridor, which would be very important to get a flow of people back to their shattered remains. But Netanyahu has still got all the keys. He's still got total control over the amount of aid that goes in, the quality of aid that goes in, and the speed with which his troops pull back. And he'll be trying to maneuver the best possible outcome for this. So my feeling is, yes, I think this is the beginning of the end, but we're so far away from a viable plan that we've got to be very, very cautious about, what we're dealing with.
Right, because we're here marking 2 years since October the 7th. October the 7th didn't happen in a vacuum, and so in order for us to not be sitting here again, having this conversation again, the circumstances that enabled October the 7th to happen in the first place, well, they would need to fundamentally change.
Yeah, that's exactly the point I'm trying to make, because what everyone has suggested so far is to turn the clock back to October the 6th. That's what they think they're going to achieve by having a multinational force in Gaza, by having no power or control by Palestinians of any nature. They're all just going to do the total legal and military authority has been taken away from anyone on the ground, and that's a lot worse than October the 6th. And we knew that October the 6th was impossible. Let me just go back a little bit and just explain why I think we're in a new world here. We've had the biggest battle and the longest battle of the war, a bigger battle than took place in 1948, more explosive used than all the previous wars put together, several Hiroshimas created, the total destruction of society, a genocide. These things were never, they were tried before, but they never happened on this scale. And we can't just simply say, fine, all right, that's the end of the war, we'll just go back to a normality of 2.1 million people in tents. I don't think that will ever happen. And I think while one can say that Israel has won the battle, Israel has lost the war. And why do I say that? Because something very fundamental has changed in these 2 years, and that is world opinion. Whether you look at it from the point of view of popular opinion, like the quantity and the frequency of demonstrations all the way around the Western world, in fact all over the world, or whether you look about the dominance of the Palestinian narrative on social media, or whether you look about the incremental changes, but still quite important changes of the political elites, more people than ever of the politicians saying that we now need to recognise a Palestinian state. That's a huge shift that's taken place in 2 years, and I think it's an irreversible change. It's not something that will revert back to something that we call October the 6th, or revert back to a sort of international mandate, which is what they're trying on Gaza, like a repeat of the British mandate, only it's an international one.
Right.
And those things are really, really important. So I don't think that's going to change now, and I don't think Israel's image has been destroyed by this war, and they'll never be able to restore it. And that will have profound implications going forward. Israel doesn't yet realise it, but it can't actually put all these pieces back together again because its image has changed fundamentally in the world. And I think that will also have an effect on the Palestinian leadership, because obviously, again, the only options are a Palestinian leadership that is totally compromised. That has been a sort of Vichy regime. That's the only option left. And this has to change from the bottom up. That is a very, very difficult part that has to change, the Palestinian leadership. But if the international pressure keeps up and doesn't stop, doesn't say, oh, hey, we're in negotiations now, as it did, for instance, after you had the first Intifada, then you had a whole period called Oslo, which is where the pressure was taken off Israel completely. And everyone just thought that it was going to become an internal matter of negotiations between the Palestinians and the Israelis. That cannot happen again. It is a global human rights issue, and it will stay a global human rights issue until apartheid, until occupation ends. And that's the big difference. That is the huge mileage that has been travelled in 2 years. It's a huge difference, and I think one needs structures, and that international pressure has to keep going, and then things will change on the ground.
Right, but then I feel like we have this paradox then, because that reputational damage has been done. But if we look at politically where Israel stands now and this so-called peace plan that Trump has drawn up, this seems to play far more into Israel's interests than into Palestine's, as you've laid out. Netanyahu appeared pretty happy about the conditions of the initial Trump plan. And so is Israel today celebrating greater political clout than they were on October 6th? While they've suffered this reputational damage, haven't they been handed a political victory by the US president?
Yes, that will always happen because of the sort of advisors that Trump has brought on board, which are all come from one small faction in Israel, and because of the money he's getting as well. That also comes from the same source. So they will always think that the snapback mechanism to any announcement will be in their favour. But my point is that they won't be able to employ that snapback mechanism for anyone outside that closed circle. Right. Yes, the relationship between Washington and Tel Aviv is closer than it's ever been. And it's constantly reinforced with arms and constantly reinforced with money and more aid. But that's it. The relationship between Tel Aviv and Europe is probably worse than it's been for a long time, and certainly with the global south. And that matters because Israel is actually is much closer to Europe in many senses than it is to America. And if the European market just stops or changes, or people keep on demanding change in Israel, that will have a huge effect because it's basically on our doorstep.
Economically, and also I wonder for the security of the Israeli people, right? We're talking about October 7th. This was seen at the time as a huge attack against the safety of Israelis. Why did the world, or so many world leaders, support the war at the start? Because they believed, or they said they believed, that the security of Israelis were at risk. But in the last 2 years, Israel has exchanged fire not just with Palestine, but with Iran, with Lebanon, with Yemen, with Qatar. Well, not exchanged fire, but levied fire. And as you say, it's become pretty isolated on the world stage. So a question I have then is, are Israelis today safer than they were on the 6th of October, 2023?
Well, ultimately, that was a massive security failure by its army and also by Netanyahu and the leadership in diverting so many brigades from the southern command to the West Bank, which was all about annexation and all about cementing or greed for land, if you want. And they'd left their southern flank vulnerable. And yes, it was a huge shock to them. I have a feeling that the shock consisted not only of the army letting their own guard down and breaking that historical pact they've had with Israeli troops, because it's a citizen army. That you give us your sons and we'll protect you. They broke that pact. But there was also this feeling of how dare the Palestinians rampage around us in the same way that we rampage around them. There's a much harder feeling to that. It was, who are these Palestinians to do to us what we do to them all the time? Are they safer, or do they feel safer? Certainly they don't. Are they safer from attack? Well, I think they're safer from attack from Gaza, because I think Gaza, whatever happens to Gaza, it's suffered so much. It's now outside any future operation. But is it safer from attack from Jordan? No, absolutely not. We've seen 2 attacks already on near the Allenby Bridge on the main border. Is it safe from the Arab feeling on the streets of rage and of anger and of the feeling that it's our turn to do our bit now? No, it's not. And that can be charted in Jordan, it can be charted in Egypt, it can be charted in Lebanon, it can be charted in Syria. And are the elites that run the country sensitive about that? Of course they are. So is Israel living in I haven't mentioned Iran, but Iran as well thinks it's had its 9/11 in that unprovoked attack. And it's now saying it is going on the offensive, not the defensive. So it is preparing for another attack by Netanyahu. So you've got not only extremely imperfect plan, even if it works. I mean, it's so shot full of holes, the idea of the transitional authority and a future governance of Gaza. But you've also got all these other wars, all these other battles. And if I name them in terms of what I expect next, I would say Al-Aqsa would be next, in terms of a big Israeli settler push to turn it into an Ibrahimi mosque in Hebron and have an established Jewish presence, almost as if it's split in Al-Aqsa, which would cause a huge reaction. And I expect creeping annexation to continue in the West Bank, which will have its own dynamics in Jordan. So while Gaza may, I think, be drawing to an end, you've got Iran, and Netanyahu could attack Iran as a way of avoiding an election, a new election. And the internal dynamics in Israel is also very, very shaky, because if I'm right and thinking we are in an end game to this war, it's only because Netanyahu feels that it would be he's bought the time to get another election. So there was no military purpose in continuing the war, and that was said by IDF leaders for over a year now, and certainly by the current one. The reoccupation of Gaza City is stalled, and the mass population of movement didn't happen. And you've got all these fires burning all the way around the region, which is sort of unfinished business. Hezbollah hasn't disarmed. Certainly it won't disarm north of the Litani River. You've got this very, very shaky agreement in Syria. I mean, Israel's got 15 bases in southern Syria, and several of them are just 20 kilometers away from Damascus, and it's now controlling the water resources as well. That's there, and that has to be that a retreat has to be negotiated there. There's Iran fuming and waiting for a revenge attack, and there's everyone in between, and there's still the Houthis. So none of these foes have disappeared. None of them have been disarmed, and none of them think that this is full time. And will now go back to some sort of regional stability. So I really don't think Israel has won on a number of accounts. But I think the cost to its reputation has been something that was originally in Yahya Sinwar's plan, when he said that either they return to the borders of 1967, or we'll foist a war on them that will destroy their reputation, and that's exactly what has happened.
So the beginning of the end, but it doesn't sound like you're just talking about the end of the war in Gaza. You say that Israel has suffered irreparable reputational damage in 2 years. The boycotts, divestments, and sanctions BDS movement has gained immense traction for consumer and corporate boycotts of Israel. We've seen cultural boycotts, surmounting, I guess, protests are sweeping the world, and a lot of people are asking, is this kind of the South Africa moment, the moment before the end of apartheid in South Africa, where the white supremacist colonial rule had just become unconscionable to the world, and the regime upholding it could no longer be sustained?
Well, there are big differences between South Africa and Israel. South Africa eventually, you had an apartheid regime that realised they had to negotiate with the ANC. You've got no such indication, either in Netanyahu or anyone around him, that he has to negotiate with anyone. He thinks he's won. So there's a very big difference between the two. There are also no frontline states here. And the frontline states there are in this totally compromised position. But there is world opinion, and that I think has definitively changed, irreversibly changed. And there is, and it has punctured the myth that Israel, that the project to build Israel is basically a stable and good thing. That's gone forever. Israel is now being seen as a source of instability in the region, not a source of stability. So in terms of timescale, it's very difficult to predict when these things that I'm talking about actually come to fruition, when there is a political class in the West that basically doesn't just simply underwrite everything Israel does, arm them, and say it's Israel's right to defense. I think we're in the last generation of politicians that say that, but the new generation of politicians that says, no, this is not right of self-defense, this is naked aggression. have yet to come to power. So that time frame is longer. But I think in terms of boycotting Israel, in terms of keeping the pressure up internationally, I don't think anyone who has started doing this will now say immediately, "Oh, fine, that's great. There's no war in Gaza anymore. Let's go trade with Israel again," because they'll see that this still has to keep on going. I mean, in 2 years, if you consider what happened, what the situation was in October the 6th, the Palestinian cause was all but dead on its feet. You had Saudi Arabia that was just about to sign the Abraham Accords. You had a whole body of opinion and diplomatic fashion, if you like, that said that let's trade with Israel, let's normalize with Israel, and we'll get all sorts of goodies. So all sorts of countries around the Arab world were thinking of the mega bucks they could make if they normalized with Israel. And compare that to the situation now, where no one is thinking that. And even the people who normalized with Israel are saying, what benefit have we got? I'm talking about the change of mood in the United Arab Emirates, who are the closest to Israel in terms of the security and the arms they're getting and the intelligence they're getting from Israel. So I think the whole mood around the Abraham Accords has changed. We're not now saying let's normalize with Israel. We're asking ourselves a whole bunch of new questions as a result of what's happened in the last 2 years.
So then paint us a picture as we come to the end of this show today, what the next chapter might look like for Israel. It perhaps, say this Trump plan goes through, and perhaps it makes...
We should be asking what the next chapter looks like for Palestine.
We will be, actually, just to make very clear to everyone
Israel,
that actually the next show that we do here will be entirely focused on the impact
for
and
Israel,
consequences. But I suppose, it's so often that when we talk about October the 7th and what is the genocide that we've seen in the 2 years since, the questions people ask are about, or many ask and governments ask are about Hamas's culpability and how this has been allowed to happen by agents within Palestine. And actually what we wanted to do today is really look at what is happening inside Israel that has made this possible. And I suppose
what the future looks for Israel is more international isolation, a lot more friction between Netanyahu. He's still on trial and he's still trying to get rid of his attorney general, so much more focus on that. Much more focus on who the next leader of the Shin Bet will be. He's trying to put the pieces in place whereby he stays in power, he gets re-elected, and he pursues his agenda for Greater Israel, right? With or without Gaza. And so I think there'll be many more internal battles in Israel, much more insecurity, and a feeling of if I'm right in thinking we're seeing the end of the occupation of Gaza, what the reckoning will be inside Israel, i.e., what did we really win, and what have we achieved in 2 years? So a lot more internal strife and a lot more internal reckoning amongst the various elites.
And for Palestine?
So for Palestine, I think this has been a horrendous 2 years. It's been the worst in its history. It's been the bloodiest, and the world let it happen. So that pain will not be wiped out in generations. And what Palestine really needs is a new leadership, and all Palestinians need to think about how that new leadership is created. A leadership that isn't compromised, that has vision, and can lead its people to their own promised land.